Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I've been following this subreddit for a while now, and it reminded me of something that happened when I was around 15. I was raised in Malaysia, as a Chinese Malaysian wasn't always easy, especially during major holidays when cultural differences sometimes became more apparent. My family always made it a point to visit my maternal grandparents for Lunar New Year. It was our tradition, a 4-hour drive that I actually looked forward to because my grandmother made the best dumplings. That one year we were all excited because my grandmother had promised to teach me her secret dumpling recipe. The drive had been smooth until we got a call from her about a burst pipe in their neighborhood. She was worried about making dinner and asked if we could pick up some bottled water on our way. We stopped at this dollar store that we knew would be open even during the holiday. The place was absolutely packed. Imagine combining weekend shopping with Lunar New Year preparations. Every aisle was crowded and the poor cashiers were working overtime to handle the rush. I was struggling with 2 large water cooler bottles. You know, those huge ones offices use. While my mom went to grab something she'd forgotten. The line was moving slowly and my arms were starting to ache from holding these bottles. That's when it happened. This guy suddenly appeared in front of me with his 5 kids in tow. Each child was holding either a toy or some candy, and they all looked pretty young. The oldest couldn't have been more than 10. I was trying to figure out how to tell him there was a line when my mom returned. My mom politely pointed out to him that I had been standing in line first. The guy turned around and gave my mom this weird, sleazy smile. The kind that makes your skin crawl. He responded in Malay, trying to sound smooth, suggesting that we shouldn't make a fuss since we were all Malaysians anyway. I was standing there, mouth hanging open, wondering where these kids' mother was and how anyone could put up with this man long enough to have 5 children with him. But my mom, she wasn't having any of it. She fired back loudly, questioning his logic. If we were all Malaysians, she asked, then why did he think he deserved to cut in front of other Malaysians in line? She made sure everyone in the store could hear her words. The guy's sleazy smile disappeared faster than free samples at a food court. His face turned red, and he started mumbling under his breath. A few people in line started making comments about his behavior, and one elderly lady even clicked her tongue disapprovingly. You know, that classic Asian auntie move that makes you feel 2 inches tall. The store manager, who had been restocking nearby, walked over to see what the commotion was about. The manager asked if there was a problem, his tone making it clear he was ready to handle any issues. Before the guy could say anything, 3 different customers jumped in to explain how he'd tried to cut in line with his kids. The manager crossed his arms and sternly told the man he needed to move to the back of the line or leave the store entirely. The guy gathered his kids and shuffled to the back of the line, still avoiding eye contact with everyone. His kids looked embarrassed, and the oldest one was trying to hide behind their shopping basket. As they walked away, I could hear other customers discussing how some people try to use their children as an excuse for bad behavior. My mom just smiled, helped me adjust my grip on the water bottles, and we paid for our stuff. When we were leaving, I noticed the guy was still in line, looking incredibly uncomfortable as people kept looking at him and whispering. The elderly lady who had clicked her tongue at him was right behind him in line, and every few minutes she'd make that disapproving sound again, making him sing further into himself. We made it to my grandparents' house in time for dinner, and my grandmother did teach me her dumpling recipe that night. But honestly, the most memorable part of that Lunar New Year was watching my mom stand up to that entitled parent and seeing karma being served, one disapproving tongue click at a time. I'm a motorcycle mechanic, and I've been riding bikes since I was 16. Started with a beat-up Honda that I restored myself, and over the years, I've built quite a reputation in our local riding community. My latest project was a classic Harley that I'd spent months restoring. It was my pride and joy, and yes, it was loud, but I always respected quiet hours and never rode it before 9 a.m. or after 8 p.m. The couple next door moved in about 6 months ago. From day one, the wife, who I'll call Karen, had a problem with everything. My motorcycle, my work hours, even the color of my house. Nothing was good enough for her. Her husband was usually quiet, just standing behind her during her tirades with this defeated look on his face. Karen would come stomping over to my driveway almost daily. She would yell about my motorcycle being a menace and how some people were trying to live peaceful lives in the neighborhood. When I explained that I only rode during reasonable hours and was well within the legal noise limits, she just got more angry. She threatened to call the police if I didn't stop what she called my nonsense. And she did call the police. Multiple times. Each time the officers would come, measure the noise levels, and confirm I wasn't breaking any laws. This only made her more furious. One Saturday morning I was having coffee when I heard a weird noise outside. It was around 7 a.m. and I wasn't planning to ride that day. When I looked out my window, Karen's husband was crouching next to my motorcycle with what looked like explosives. Before I could even get to my front door, there was a massive explosion. The blast knocked me back inside my house. When I finally got outside, my beautiful Harley was in pieces, and Karen's husband was on the ground, clutching what remained of his right arm. Karen came running out of their house screaming. She started yelling for help, accusing me of attacking her husband and demanding someone call the police. I protested, telling her I had been inside my house the whole time. I immediately called emergency services while Karen continued screaming accusations at me. Within minutes, police cars and an ambulance arrived. Karen was putting on quite a show. She demanded that the officers arrest me, claiming I had attacked her husband because they complained about my motorcycle. She insisted that I was the one who had planted the explosives, but her performance fell apart quickly. My security cameras had caught everything. The police reviewed the footage right there, showing her husband placing the explosives and the resulting accident. One of the officers asked if I wanted to press charges, and I immediately said yes. Karen started screaming about how they were just trying to get some peace and quiet, and claimed that my motorcycle was destroying their property values. While the paramedics were treating her husband, the police searched their house and found more explosives and detailed plans about destroying my motorcycle. Turns out her husband was an amateur demolitions enthusiast with zero proper training. They found forum posts where he'd been asking about the best ways to get rid of a motorcycle. Both of them were arrested, him for the attempted destruction of property and possession of illegal explosives, her for being an accessory to the crime. The evidence from their house showed she'd been the one pushing him to do it, even buying some of the materials. They tried to plea bargain, but the prosecutor wouldn't budge. Karen's husband got 5 years in prison and she got 18 months plus probation. They had to sell their house to pay for legal fees and restitution for my destroyed motorcycle. I used the restitution money to build an even better bike, and this time I installed a top-of-the-line security system with motion sensors. The new neighbors who moved in are a lovely elderly couple who actually enjoy watching me work on motorcycles in my garage. The husband used to ride when he was younger, and now he comes over sometimes to help me work on restorations. Karen and her husband got divorced while they were both in prison. Apparently, she blamed him for not doing the job right and getting caught. I guess some people never learn. I had just finished another exhausting 12-hour shift at the hospital. As a resident in emergency medicine, these long nights were becoming my new normal. The train ride home was usually my chance to decompress, catch up on medical journals, or simply zone out to some music. That Thursday night, though, turned into something I'll never forget. I boarded my usual 11 p.m. train, finding it surprisingly busy for that hour. Most passengers were either dozing off or absorbed in their phones. I chose my regular spot, a window seat in the middle car, where I could lean against the wall and rest my head while watching the city lights blur past. After a few stops, I noticed a British gentleman sit across the aisle. He had this distinguished air about him, wearing a well-tailored suit despite the late hour. He pulled out what looked like a worn copy of some classic novel and settled in quietly. Little did I know he'd become the highlight of my evening. Everything changed 3 stops later. The train doors opened and she walked in. The woman, who would soon become the center of attention, had that unmistakable "I want to speak to your manager" energy radiating off her. Designer handbag, sunglasses at night, yes, really, and this expression, like everyone around her, was somehow beneath her notice. The train was maybe half full, with plenty of empty seats scattered throughout the car. But this woman, this Karen, scanned the carriage like a predator seeking prey. Her eyes locked onto me, or more specifically, my messenger bag occupying the seat next to me. I had my noise-canceling headphones on, trying to drown out the world with some classical music after my chaotic shift. I felt aggressive tapping on my shoulder. Looking up, I saw her standing there, lips moving. I pulled one headphone off. She immediately demanded that I move my bag, stating bluntly that she was going to sit there. I tried to point out that there were several empty seats available, but she just repeated her demand more forcefully. I gestured to at least 4 completely empty pairs of seats within view, explaining that there were plenty of open spots and she could sit anywhere. This only seemed to aggravate her more. She launched into a rant about young people today being disrespectful, claiming that in her day they respected their elders and gave up their seats. I stood my ground, reiterating that I wasn't giving up my seat, but was offering her the choice of many other empty ones. She continued her tirade, accusing my generation of being selfish and entitled, with no consideration for others. She even tried to guilt-trip me by asking how long she'd been on her feet that day. The irony of her calling anyone else entitled seemed lost on her. I just finished treating 3 trauma cases and a cardiac arrest, but I wasn't about to get into a who's more tired competition. That's when our unexpected hero decided to join the conversation. The British gentleman across the aisle lowered his book and leaned forward with the most perfectly calm expression I've ever seen. He called out to her, pointing out that she was making quite a spectacle of herself. Karen immediately snapped back, telling him this didn't concern him and to mind his own business. The British man explained that she'd made it everyone's business by throwing her tantrum. Then, in the most eloquent British way possible, he told her to go away, using some colorful language that included the memorable phrase, "wanker face McDog C word." The silence that followed was deafening. Someone toward the back of the car let out a snort, which quickly turned into several people trying and failing to suppress their laughter. Karen's face went through several shades of red in rapid succession. She sputtered in indignation, demanding to know if we knew who she was. The British man didn't miss a beat, pointing out that she was clearly someone who thought the world revolved around them. He added that she wasn't royalty, wasn't even in the queue for it, and suggested she find another seat before embarrassing herself further. Karen threatened to report him and call the transit authority. The British gentleman welcomed the idea, suggesting we ask all the passengers who had their phones out if they'd recorded her performance. He pointed out that the transit authority would probably be very interested in seeing how she'd been harassing an exhausted medical professional. That's when I noticed several passengers indeed had their phones out, not so subtly, recording the entire exchange. Karen must have noticed too, because her next noise was an incoherent sputter before she stormed off to an empty seat near the front of the car. The British gentleman caught my eye and gave me a subtle wink before returning to his book. For the rest of the ride, Karen sat rigidly in her seat, trying to maintain what dignity she had left, while pointedly ignoring the occasional chuckles that would break out. When I reached my stop, I stood up and caught the British man's attention. I thanked him, telling him that was brilliant. He humbly brushed it off, saying it was nothing, and philosophically noting that some people need a reminder that the world's got enough real problems without manufacturing new ones. When I stepped off the train, I heard several other passengers thanking him too. Karen was still sitting there, now apparently fascinated by something on her phone, refusing to look at anyone. My wife and I have been living with my in-laws for the past year. It wasn't ideal, but we had a good reason. We've been saving up for our dream home while trying to provide stability for our 8-year-old daughter. She's been attending the local elementary school since junior kindergarten and absolutely loves it there. Her teacher this year is amazing, and she's built such strong friendships with her classmates. We finally found the perfect house about 3 weeks ago. It needed some work, but the price was right, and we could see its potential. The only downside was that it fell outside our daughter's current school boundaries. But we weren't worried because we planned to finish the renovations before moving in, which wouldn't be until next summer. This way, our daughter could finish the school year with her friends. Everything was going fine until this morning when I checked my email and nearly spat out my coffee. The principal had sent me a message informing me that due to our recent home purchase outside the school boundaries, which served our new address, she had copied the principal of Elementary School West on the email and stated that our daughter's last day at her current school would be December 24th. I replied to the email immediately expressing my confusion about the situation. I explained that we hadn't requested any transfer and hadn't moved, emphasizing that we were still residing at our current address within the school boundaries. I asked her to explain why she'd made this decision without consulting us. The principal responded within minutes with a condescending message about how it was her duty as an educator to ensure proper enrollment based on district boundaries. She explained that she had become aware of our home purchase through public records and claimed she was simply being proactive in managing student placement. My blood was boiling at this point. I decided to call the school district superintendent's office. The superintendent's assistant was extremely helpful when I explained the situation. She was shocked and immediately assured me that this was completely unauthorized, explaining that the principal had no authority to transfer students without parental consent, especially when we were still residing within the current school boundaries. Things moved quickly after that. Within an hour, the superintendent himself called me. He apologized for the situation and assured me that the principal had severely overstepped her boundaries. He told me that they had already canceled the transfer request to Elementary School West and confirmed that our daughter could absolutely remain at her current school. But I wasn't satisfied with just that. I requested a meeting with both the superintendent and the principal, which was set for the next morning. Walking into that meeting, I was ready. I had printed copies of all emails, property documents showing our current residence, and documentation of our renovation timeline. The principal tried to defend herself by claiming she was only trying to be efficient and proactive in managing school enrollments. I countered by pointing out that she had violated our privacy and made unauthorized decisions about our daughter's education. The superintendent stepped in, explaining that this was a serious breach of protocol. He emphasized that parents have the right to make educational decisions for their children and expressed concern about accessing and acting upon private property records for unauthorized purposes. The principal's face turned red as the superintendent continued. He told her that given the severity of the situation, they would be placing a formal reprimand in her file. He also mandated that she attend training on privacy protocols and proper enrollment procedures. When the principal tried to argue, the superintendent shut her down. He further instructed that she would need to send a formal apology email to our family and copy both himself and the Elementary School West principal to correct this miscommunication. Later that afternoon, we received what had to be the most begrudging apology email I've ever read. The principal briefly acknowledged that she had acted without proper authority and said our daughter was welcome to continue her education at the school while we resided within their boundaries. Then the superintendent's addition to the email, where he clearly stated that moving forward, all enrollment changes would require explicit parental consent and proper documentation. He emphasized that they valued their students and respected families' right to make educational decisions. Our daughter never knew about any of this drama, and she's still happily attending her school with her friends. And I heard the principal has been much more careful about staying in her lane since then. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.